Hello YouTube, my name is Alex and this is the Lifting Nomad. And in this video I want to go over my personal opinion, the best 5 cities that I believe new digital nomads should go to first. Now this is based off my experience, my research, my understanding of the local culture. And again, this is not the be all and end all, this is just what I think. And from my experience, so far so good. So hopefully this works out for you. But without further ado, let's get into this. All right, so city number 1, I think the absolute best first city for someone to start digital nomading in is Lisbon, Portugal. I lived in Portugal for this summer for 2 months or so, and it was truly incredible. And there's a number of reasons I think it's one of the best starting points for people just getting into this sort of lifestyle or first time working abroad. Maybe you've got like a month from your work that's letting you work anywhere and you want to try something. Lisbon is a great spot. First of all, the dollar in euros compared to USD, I'm Canadian, so it's not quite as good, but compared to USD is amazing right now. You're gonna save a ton of money. Just anywhere in the EU where they're using euros right now is an incredible time to go as an American. The second piece with that is Portugal is a very, to be candid, a pretty poor country. So their dollar doesn't go very far internally, and it's pretty sad, to be clear, I think, what a lot of the DNs and like over tourism is doing from Americans just going there and being like total dickheads. Not all of them, but there is a lot of people there, and it's rightfully so pissing off a lot of the locals. But at the same time, being a person who goes there to give tourism money, tips well, says please and thank you, doesn't make it, you're not displacing anyone, I don't think is a big issue. I went on a remote working trip where we were staying in a flat. There were 7 of us. So it's not like we were taking like an Airbnb or something like that that's driving up the rental prices. So I would say it's a great kicking off point. And then as well from Lisbon, you can do weekend trips to Porto or the Algarve, both incredibly beautiful places. I spent a weekend in the Algarve and I did almost 10 days in Porto, and they're both very, very beautiful places. But as a whole, Portuguese people are incredibly welcoming and friendly. They also speak really, really good English. I think that's an important part as your first city to try out. So that's why I would say Lisbon, great spot to start for number 1. Number 2 is Mexico City, La Ciudad de Mexico, down in Mexico. A lot easier to get to from North American workers, I think, because the time zone is a lot more realistic. Lisbon is an amazing city, don't get me wrong, but it is still 5 or 6 hours ahead depending on the time of year, and that can be very difficult to work. I was up till like 10, 11, 12 some nights, like midnight, while trying to work East Coast hours, so it was kind of difficult for me. If you have more of like a freelancer, sort of like marketing agency kind of role or software development, it might be a little bit easier just to work in the morning. But for someone like me who has sales calls and I have to be at a set schedule, it was a little bit difficult to do that. So Mexico City is my number 2, and for a few different reasons. First of all, can accommodate a lot of different budgets. And what I mean by that is there's areas of it that are extremely bougie. You can ball out and stay in a 5-star hotel and go to fancy restaurants. And there's also a lot more budget-friendly ways to do it, whether that's staying in hostels or backpacking or co-living spaces. There's a number of different options. And then the second piece of that, a lot of the tourist areas of Mexico City, they're going to speak English. So for those of you who don't speak good Spanish, when I first did my first remote working trip in Colombia, I spoke no Spanish, and it was extremely humbling for me to go there where the locals really don't speak any English. So that can be a bit of trouble for some people. So I would recommend, if you have it, someone who can speak Spanish. I went with one of my best friends who's a Colombian native, which was amazing. But without that, I would have been like really in the shitter while I was down there. Mexico City also has a lot of different access to various parts of Central and Latin America. It's just a major, major hub. Like, I don't think people realize how big that fucking city is. And also some of the best culinary scenes in the world. Like literally the number 1 restaurant in North America, Pujols, is in Mexico City. It has some of the best street food in the world. It's extremely cheap. Beer is everywhere. Tacos are amazing. And there's just a ton of diversity from what you can shoot for. So Mexico City, number 2, no question. Number 3, best city to start digital nomading in for me is Medellin, Colombia. And for a couple of reasons, again, I've actually been to Medellin. I was there for 2 months in la primavera, in the spring. And it's a very, very dense community of digital nomads. And if you're joining like the DN WhatsApp group or joining meetups on Facebook or something like that, or even like the language exchange classes. There's a lot of DNs down there, and a lot of Americans and Canadians and Brits. We met a ton of people from traveling all over the world. While we were backpacking, we did like weekend trips to Santa Marta, near Cartagena, Bogota, and there's just a lot of different things you can do. You can go to Guatapé, you can go to Salento, you can see the coffee regions, you can do like paragliding just outside of the city. From Medellin, you can fly to like Brazil and like Peru, Chile, like pretty easily, as it's again pretty far south there. The other thing that's really great about Medellin and Colombia in general is how close it is to the equator, so the weather is always beautiful. Bogota was a little rainy and cold because of the altitude, how high it is, but overall, like Medellin, 365 days a year is like Celsius, like 23 to 25, so Fahrenheit, that's like what, 70, 75 every day. So it doesn't really get cold, it doesn't really get that hot either. Some days it gets a little bit warmer when it's sunny out, but it's just a really consistent city to go to any time of year and get a very similar experience. The one caveat I would say is there's not a lot of Spanish outside of the major, or English, excuse me, outside of the major tourism areas. So we were in Poblado, there's also Moreles, but there's only a few neighborhoods that you're gonna find a lot of English. Outside of that, like the locals don't really speak English. So definitely brush up on your Espanol before you head down to Medellin, Colombia. Number 4 for me is Buenos Aires, Argentina. Buenos Aires, Argentina. And it's way down there, first of all. So that's one of the times you're gonna have to be a little cognizant of the time of year you're traveling, because for the most part, most of us in North America, if you're coming from Canada or the US, during our summer is their winter, and during our winter is their summer. So I'm gonna be going down there in like January when it's cold as balls here in Canada, but down in Argentina, it's gonna, because they're on literally the opposite end of the earth, it's gonna be hot. It's gonna be their peak summer season, and I'm doing that intentionally. I hate the cold. I'm a Canadian who hates the cold, okay? Bite me. But BA is a really massive, massive city. Again, another one of these metropolises that Americans or North Americans in general are maybe a little bit ignorant to the size of. It's like 14 million people. It's absolutely massive, almost like half of the Canadian population in one city. And because of that, there's again a ton of range of budgets you can hit, a ton of different nationalities and food and culture you can experience while being in just one metropolis sort of location that's going to give you different options to explore. The other thing that's really cool about Argentina is, of course, Patagonia or the Antarctic, which you can actually do a cruise or a flight to from some of the southern cities in Argentina. And once you get far enough south, it actually gets cold again as you get close to like Antarctica and the South Pole. But some really expensive, interesting trips you can do from there. The other thing that's pretty cool is you can just go across the harbor to Uruguay. And Uruguay is like a pretty bougie Spanish-speaking country down there where they accommodate to tourists really, really well. So really close to Buenos Aires, you just basically take a ferry across the harbor and then you're in Uruguay. You're also basically parallel with Santiago, Chile. So it's simple flight, really cheap. There's an airport like right downtown Buenos Aires as well on the harbor. So you can fly around to a lot of those like countries, like Paraguay is down there as well, pretty simply. So you have a ton of different options. Unfortunately as well, the economy is really, really shitty in Argentina. So the dollar goes a long way. The one sort of caveat to it is they have like an underground currency exchange. Basically, the government's trying to control how much outside currency is coming in. Of course, that didn't work. So the people just decided to make their own third party market, let's say, where they can exchange USD for pesos and get more than double the current rate that you would get from like a bank. So it's kind of fucked up, but at the same time, it's a really cool opportunity to get a lot of bang for your buck while you're traveling down there. So BA, number 4, hands down. Number 5, the last on this list, as you can tell, a lot of South America here, Lima in Peru. Lima is another one of these major cities that is a little bit, I would say, sketchier. I think Medellin and Lima are fairly, let's say, not as safe. I think Buenos Aires or Mexico City or Lisbon especially, of course, is going to be extremely safe. A little bit more edgy, so you do have to be careful of where you're staying and where you're going. With that being said, there's neighborhoods in Lima like Miraflores, which is very high end. There's a lot of like 5-star hotels and a lot of English and a lot of tourism in that neighborhood. But it's still extremely affordable. Like, I was trying to explain to my parents, like, they're like, why aren't you getting a condo? Why aren't you just staying in Toronto? Why don't you just love it? I'm like, well, I've been paying like $25 $2,500 or $3,000 a month for rent in Toronto right now for like a 1-bedroom condo, nothing fancy, versus I can spend like $1,500 and get like the sickest place ever down in South America for a month. And that's like Airbnb or Booking.com or one of these remote working like co-living spaces. So it's, you know, I'm saving money and also getting to see the world. So for me, it's kind of a no-brainer about where I'm going to be going. But Lima, again, really centrally located, tons of like Machu Picchu's around there, Cusco. There's a ton of like weekend trips you can do nearby. You can fly to nearby countries. It's also closer kind of the west coast because Buenos Aires is on the east coast of South America. Lima's on the west coast, so it's 2 hours behind, I believe, from BA. And there's just a ton to see in that area as well. Miraflores, that neighborhood, you're gonna find a lot of English speaking, but for the most part, Peruvians don't speak a ton of English. Again, it's kind of like Colombia where the locals mostly speak Spanish. So in general, I would say if you're gonna be looking at doing a South America digital nomad trip, which I always recommend as your first one because it's closer, Eastern Standard Time, it's cheaper, and it's really close to home in case you decide to, like, you know, if you get homesick, it does happen and you need to get out of there. It's not too bad to just get on a flight and in a day, basically you're home. With that said, I would say Lima is best to go with a group at the beginning, similar to Medellin. I think Mexico City and BA you can probably do on your own as there's so much to do and so many museums and so much nightlife and so many DNs there already. But those two cities, Lima and Medellin, I would recommend going with at least a few friends for your first time, get to know the neighborhood. And I would definitely say spend like 6 months or so before you leave taking Spanish classes. I take Preply, that's what I've been doing for the last year or so, and I do like Duolingo to practice it as well. That helps my vocabulary, and then I do Preply to practice speaking. Perfect. Well, that's my list of 5 best starting cities for digital nomads. Maybe it's controversial, maybe it's not, I don't know. But if you enjoyed this or if you agreed or disagreed, feel free to leave a comment in the section below. Otherwise, my name is Alex, this is the Lifting Nomad, and we'll see you next time. Peace.